Hey everybody, it's Dave, and I'm going to be joining you this week down here in the lower right-hand corner, and I'm going to go through the lecture on art theft with you. Art theft is one of my most favorite areas of history. It's the area where I spend the most time studying and researching, and I came up with this presentation probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's gone through various incantations, and it's still going to continue to grow and evolve. In fact, normally it's about an hour lecture, and I'm thinking about turning it into a 2 hour lecture, but I'm still, dealing with how exactly to do that without overworking the subject matter where, my students would get too bored talking about it. So when we look at why has stealing artwork become so popular in the first place, of course the main reason that we're concerned with is the tremendous amount of money these art objects are worth. When you think of Andy Warhol's soup cans, those are worth like $1 million each. And even with the economic downturn we saw in like 2007 and 2008, art prices really continue to propel themselves. And I think it was February 2015 where we had a work at auction done by Gauguin fetched like $300 million, just these astronomical amounts for these artworks. So, of course, money is by far the number one reason why people will steal. Of course, how easy it is to do. When you go to a museum, they really are like any other business. We're dealing with companies that may be underfunded, underemployed, employees undertrained, lack of poor security measures in some of these museums. And while in America we may not have as much of the issues that we see in Europe, because a lot of famous artwork there is in poorly guarded summer houses, for instance, that are on tour. The museum guards that you see throughout these places, they're never armed. All they can do is really yell at you to stop and to try to prevent artwork from being taken. The size and shape of artworks also is something that makes them really conducive to steal. When I was working at the LA County Museum of Art, I was amazed that sometimes an artwork would be sent through the mail. Especially during the 07-08 budget crisis when all the departments are trying to make ends meet. Absolutely, they go FedEx and they're insured. It's a lot less expensive than sending, for instance, a collections manager in along with the work. Now, we're not talking about stealing a large, maybe 6-foot marble sculpture, something that would take several people. But definitely with these paintings, sometimes they're small enough to put in a knapsack or a backpack or even cut from their frames and then placed underneath a coat or something along those lines. And finally, we need to think about how easy it is to do it because no one's really out looking for it. As far as those people looking for enforcement of art theft, we have the art theft detail from the LAPD. And a lot of us, when I first was researching art theft, I had no idea that the LAPD had their own art theft detail. And I called him up and I asked straight out, like, how many people do you have working here? There was just one. That was the entire staff of that department. Fortunately, though, we have other entities out there helping us find lost and stolen art. For instance, Interpol, the International Police Agency, currently is working on a list of 25,000 works of art. That's more than enough to fill any museum. And we also have the Art Loss Register, which is a database that auction houses use to search before they put an object up for sale. They currently get about one hit for every 11,000 artworks that are up for sale. And the Art Loss Register contains over 200,000 works of art that are considered either lost, stolen, or missing. One of the stats that really blew my mind was that art theft is the third highest grossing criminal activity after drugs and weapons. So you have drugs, you have weapons, and then you have art theft. And that's just crazy to think about. Of course, we always think about drugs and weapons being a tool of the underworld, and then all of a sudden we have art theft along with those. And, that's pretty incredible. The sad part is, though, that only about 10% of stolen artwork is ever going to be recovered. And that traffickers only receive about 10 cents on the dollar, so about 10% of its value. Now, the way that this lecture is broken up, it's done into a couple parts. The first part, we're going to take a look and see what happens to art during times of war. Art can be stolen anytime, but especially during wartime, it just makes things so much easier because of all the chaos that's surrounding it. And then after we look at that, we're going to look and see about what happens to art from individual art thieves. We'll look at some of the more famous thieves. Now, that last image was the Iraqi National Museum in Baghdad. And in 2003, during the Gulf War, it was looted. And this is really a horrific crime because this is really the cradle of civilization. You think about all the art objects that were here from really the birth of civilization in Mesopotamia and all of that. We studied those lectures early on in the semester. And the museum lost about 50,000 objects, and many others like these were damaged. The museum has reopened. These, stolen artifacts, I always think that, they go from these amazing, important artworks to basically nothing more than souvenirs for a lot of people. Now, this is just the latest in a string of looting of museums and artworks that have really been around since the Greeks conquered Troy. One of the greatest art thieves was Napoleon. And between 1796 and 1815, he and his armies ravaged not only North Africa, but also Europe. And they stole art from countries such as Austria and Poland, Belgium, Germany, Spain, and most importantly, Italy. Now, he stole, just from the Vatican, 500 works of art. The most famous one he stole, or at least according to him, was this sculpture, which was Laocoon and his sons. And Laocoon is the priest who tries to warn the people of Troy it's not such a good idea to bring that wooden horse inside the gates. In fact, one of his famous quotes is, "What deadly fraud is this?" So the gods who wanted this to happen sent this serpent out to destroy Laocoon. And you see this great sculptural piece where these three figures are kind of writhing with this snake, and it's just very powerful and very dynamic. Napoleon was so pleased with his loot that he paraded it through the streets of Paris and then commemorated this set of china after the event. And you can see with the scene at the left, we have Laocoon at the center, and then over to the right, I'll bring the cursor over here, this sculpture in front of the Laocoon sculpture is another real famous work from the time period, and that's the Apollo Belvedere. Now, Napoleon had a very interesting philosophy about art theft. He thought that through art, he could build an appreciation in French society of foreign artists and civilizations. The idea that art could open our eyes to other cultures, and this really, for him, it justifies art stealing. And it actually doesn't sound that bad, but of course that's his spin on it. Now, about 130 years or so later, we have this guy here, who is also charged with stealing a lot of art. He also had a philosophy about art that art could not only open our eyes to other cultures, but it could also close them. And if you spoke to Hitler directly, he would tell you about how cultured he was, that he attended the opera and theater and musical recitals. He himself had been a student of painting, sculpture, and architecture, applying twice to the Arts Academy at Vienna. What a different world this would have been had he been accepted to art school. And one of the reasons why he wasn't was that he couldn't draw people very well. Most of the artworks that he created were like this one, and this one is by Adolf Hitler. This is, something that was very common to him, painting architecture, and particularly in the use of watercolors. These paintings are never going to be on a museum wall or a gallery wall. They're never going to be traded amongst collectors, at least in our lifetimes, and probably several generations still yet to come. We're just too close still to all the events that took place during World War II. They're locked deep in vaults in museums around the world. But I make the claim that Adolf Hitler is the greatest art collector of all time. What he was able to do just blows your mind. And we'll start first by talking about the art that he liked, that he collected, that he enjoyed. And that would be like classical art. Now, of course, he held Germanic artists in high regard, but really when it comes down to it, he loved classical art. And anytime you hear the word classical, it refers to the Greek and Roman civilizations. But we can also look at Renaissance work as something that he collected and he sought after, because the Renaissance artists such as Donatello and Michelangelo, they look back to that Greek and Roman era and pull the techniques that those artists, really first started creating, and then the Renaissance, these artists recreate those techniques. And one of them would be like contrapposto, the idea of a weight shift in the body to make it look more natural. Now, when we look at some of these buildings that Hitler built for the 1936 Olympic Games, he had his own architect, Albert Speer, construct these buildings. And you can see they're all done in the Greco-Roman fashion. Now, beyond that, knowing that he was a classicist, know that he absolutely hated modern art. And you can see hated is bold-faced and it's underlined because he could not stand modern art. And, that's tough for me to swallow because I'm a modernist. This is my favorite area of art. This is a really important key term, and he labeled over 1,400 modernist artists as degenerate. And this would also refer to the work itself that they were creating. So degenerate means having lost the physical, mental, or moral qualities that are considered to be normal and desirable. That this artwork and these artists were showing evidence of decline. And in our history, we look at, the ebb and flow of art. We started prehistory and we reach like the pinnacle during the Greek and Roman era. Then we fall into the Dark Ages, which we're right about to in this class. And then we rise up again to the Renaissance age. So Hitler's concerned that art is generating back to its basis, back to the Dark Ages. So right there is kind of where I want to stop as time's running out for this video. We'll pick this up in video number 2.